when we sit for a long period of time, the long, like 8 hours, that's not a good deal. That's definitely not a good thing for us.
Pain isn't just about one joint, one injury, or one bad day. It's your body asking for attention, and the right guidance can change everything. Welcome back to the Optimal Health Guide. I'm Michael, the host, and I'm here with Josh Vance, the Optimal Health Guide. Josh, how's the day been going for you today?
It's been very challenging today.
I hear you. Days are like that from time to time. Well, maybe that even will help shape today's content. So today, Josh, we've talked about the type of work that people put in where they sit at a desk for long periods of time, or maybe they sit still driving for a long time. And so we're going to be addressing some of that. Those types of people, maybe by the end of the day, they're experiencing pain in their neck. Maybe it's tight, or their back aches, or the hips feel stiff. And a lot of times it feels like, you're worn out. Like all I did was sit there. And so we're going to talk about sitting today. I'm really looking forward to hearing you talk about, how that works. I've heard you mention many times we're meant to be moving. And so we're going to dig into that. So looking forward to it. Before we jump into that, though, I would like to invite those of you listening to be able to help shape future episodes of the Optimal Health Guide. You can submit questions or comments at podcast.vancept.com. Each one of those we'll read, and those will help shape what we talk about in the future. Again, before we get to the content for today, I want to encourage you, if you're watching this, if you're listening in, make sure that you subscribe, make sure that you like, make sure that you follow, and even share the episodes that have impacted you the most. All of those actions really, really tremendously help us a whole bunch. All right. Well, without any further ado, let's jump into today's topic. So Josh, first question to you is, what is it that actually does happen to our bodies when we sit for long periods of time?
Interesting question. I think partly because I think defining long periods of time is an important thing to do.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's long periods of time, like I'm sitting for an hour or two. And then there's long periods of time, like I'm sitting like all day long, and changes can be similar, but there are some differences too. Obviously, when we sit for a long period of time, and by that, I mean more of the second definition, or the first definition, the long, like 8 hours, that's not a good deal. That's definitely not a good thing for us. But in general, some things that we do see, decreased circulation. You sit for prolonged periods of time, you're going to have decreased circulation in your muscles. And that's not a good thing, especially for people with some vascular issues because of veins that have kind of leaky, or they have some swelling in the legs. Decreased vascular stuff is not good. So the calves are like active muscle pumps. So, moving those contracting the calf muscles help get blood back out of the lower part of our legs towards our heart, which is a good thing. So, nice. Decreased circulation is, and of course, if you're sitting, you're not having to work very hard. And so your circulation is not going to be pumping very hard relative to where if you were a little more active. Another thing would be muscle shortening, tightness. Obviously, that is kind of something that will happen gradually over time as you maintain that seated position. So, sitting for 8 hours, in the hip flexors, or maybe the shoulders, the neck, the back, wherever, different people have different kind of places where they tend to posturally maybe get in a bad position.
Okay.
They're going to tighten up more. The longer you sit, the longer they're going to get tighter, the harder it is to get them flexible if it's a chronic thing that we do in and day out. And of course, joint stiffness, you sit for very long, especially as we do age and we get some degenerative changes, which are normal, you're going to get stiff joints. So moving around is important too. I think one of the bigger things is muscle atrophy for people that and what I mean by muscle atrophy is weakness. Muscles lose their strength over time because we aren't using as much. The more we sit prolonged periods of time, the less we are using our muscles, so the less strength we're going to have. Of course, also caloric intake and weight gain. When we sit for prolonged periods of time, we don't need a whole lot of calories, but we do tend to gain weight. So, there's a lot of issues that follow, as we do gain weight. And then the other thing I would say would be decreased aerobic capacity. And what I mean by that is we're not having to use our lungs very much. So we're sedentary. The more sedentary we are, the less of our lungs get used and the less what we would call aerobic capacity or wind, if you would, even for people that are walking, and they're going to get tired faster because they aren't doing much.
Yeah. Okay. You may have already hit on this to some degree, but I want you to go further with it. Why is it that people will often feel worse at the end of a workday where they're just sitting than at the beginning? Take that and weave that thread for us.
I think a couple things. One, stress. Stress certainly plays a level in our bodies as we're working throughout the day. But, I think another thing is muscle fatigue, depending on how we're positioning ourselves. If we're sitting in good posture, we're less likely to be as fatigued than we are if we've got some bad postural things, the head forward, the shoulders rounded, kind of slouching forward. That's an exhausting thing because you're putting some muscles in a tightened position and you're putting other muscles in a overstretched position, and they aren't working in their ideal position to do the job that they're supposed to be doing. So that kind of puts a little stress to them. Static postures for prolonged periods of time cause problems. They can cause that tightness that we were talking about, but they can also cause fatigue. If you're having to stay in one position for a long period of time without taking a break and getting out of it, man, those muscles, they're going to get tired. And that might be muscles at the base of the skull because we're doing a lot of computer work, or it might be shoulder muscles or back muscles. So, all that stuff cumulatively throughout the day kind of beats on us a little bit.
Yeah. It is interesting. It's almost ironic that sitting still can produce fatigue, but that does make sense as you go deeper into it, that muscles are still being utilized at that point, especially when it comes to posture or even poor forms of posture. So that's helpful to hear it spoken like that. What about, you kind of already mentioned some, but what parts of the body suffer the most from desk work or seated long-term work?
And this question, I think, a little challenging in the sense that all parts tend to suffer, but I think it's a little bit different for different people, and that might be because they have different comorbidities or other problems that they might have going along with it. So, example, someone with neck pain, they're probably going to have more issues with that because maybe they have some arthritic stuff, or maybe they've had a disc and they've had a fusion or a discectomy or some surgery, so that kind of puts them at certainly greater risk and probability for more problems down the road. So I would say that it's going to be a little different for different people. But in general, I would say some of the areas that suffer the most would be probably the neck and the back. Okay. Again, very much related to posture, very much related to ergonomic situation as far as what we're doing. We're a computer, driven world now, not so much paper and pencil, not to say that it's completely irrelevant, but so we're sitting at desks doing a lot of computer work using our mouse and keyboard, and hopefully everything's situated in a position where we're looking straight forward at it and our arms are resting at our side. But not always is the case. Frequently on laptops aren't always set up really. They aren't set up very well for good ergonomics. We either have the keyboard down low and then we're looking down, or it's up high and the keyboard's, elevated. So it kind of puts us in a couple different positions. Shoulders, certainly, when we have to do a lot of sitting, it's real easy to kind of get tired and the shoulders come forward and we get tight in the front, weak in the back, and then the shoulder and the neck, obviously they're connected. They work together. We get trigger points in our shoulder, but in our upper traps there, mid traps, all those muscles get myofascial sorts of problems very frequently. Of course, stress doesn't help with that. And then probably the other thing sitting from desk work is our hip flexors. We get tight because we're bent all the time, or at least 8 hours of the day, maybe less if we actually are getting up and moving around.
Yeah.
So, again, that's significant. And then, those tight hips, they play into the low back too, because if we don't have the flexibility in one joint, the next joint around it ends up having to take the brunt of it to
Yeah.
try to make up for the lack of the other one. So the two can interact and interact in not a kind way,
Yeah.
They can definitely impact each other.
Yeah. In that answer, you brought up ergonomics. And so I do quite a few video calls or meetings like this. And I've noticed that a few of my friends have started to use the standing desks. And is that an ergonomically helpful device, in your opinion?
I think it is. I don't think it solves everything, but it at least gets us a little bit more active. I mean, we're using
Yeah.
more muscle standing than we are sitting. We're now elongating our hip flexors.
Hmm.
We're using our butt muscles. We're using our quads a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, it depends also if we're standing nicely or if we kind of doing like
True.
the standing on one leg, like we're talking, chatting with our friends, kind of hanging on the hip while the other leg's totally relaxed, or if we're
Yeah.
actually standing up nice and tall. So, I think there's some benefits to it for sure, but
Yeah.
it doesn't really completely solve all the problems.
Okay. That's helpful.
Yeah, but there's some good things. You definitely are much more active if you can set it up that way, and maybe even sometimes I'll suggest people alternate a little sitting, a little standing, a little sitting, a
Sure.
little standing throughout the day. They're moving around, but they are more active. I mean, it's great because you can use more muscles.
Yeah.
You are going to be increasing your blood flow a little bit more than if you're
Hmm.
sitting. You're going to burn a few more calories. So those are all some good things. But again, ergonomics, if we're using a laptop on a standing desk, we're tending to probably be going to be looking down at it as
Yeah.
opposed to having it in the right situation. So it's still not a perfect situation necessarily, but it is an answer that
Yeah.
helps.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let me even just reflect back. Like, so here I'm sitting at a laptop, but I've got it up on, a device that allows it to be at viewable angle so that it's a direct angle on. But I do find that I don't want to type in this setting because it's, 4 to 5 inches off the ground and it's up over here. So I might use it to manipulate my screen, but I don't want to sit there for long periods of time because that's a really uncomfortable position. So that's interesting. I don't know that I had thought all of the particulars of that through. I'll oftentimes move it into another situation if it goes into typing mode. But then the fatigue, just like what you identified, is now I'm looking down as I'm typing. And so it's interesting the differences that happen there. So
Yeah, with laptops, you can't quite win both of those. It's one or the
yeah.
other.
It's either or, yeah. But
Yeah.
I like what you had said, and maybe even with this next question, you could jump further into this with desktop work or even somebody who's seated and driving for long periods of time, but changing the movement. You talked about standing and sitting, or even with a laptop, you can't win with it, so you move back and forth between the two. So go further into this. How often should someone move during the workday?
Well, I would suggest that sometimes there's constraints within work. You get
Okay.
busy, you forget, and then
Yeah.
that kind of a solution, I'll say set an alarm, set a timer on. I mean, everybody's
Yeah.
got a phone, right?
Yep.
We all have phones. They all have timers on them. That just is standard. So set an alarm to remind you to get up. And I would suggest, probably about every 30 minutes, if at all
Okay. 30.
possible. There may be some
Yeah.
constraints where you can't physically do that because of your job
Yeah.
or whatever. But if at all possible, I think 30 minutes is a good place to shoot for. And then, maybe halfway through the day or when you can, if you can take your 15-minute break, 10-minute
Mm-hmm.
break, get 10 minutes of walking outside to
Yeah.
relax, to see some scenery, some sunshine. That's great. It kind of resets your brain, gets you a little
Yep.
activity, gets muscles going, a little blood circulation. It helps with your mental framework just to get out of, the environment that you were in and see some nature.
Mm-hmm.
But at the minimum, probably every 30 minutes to stand up for a minute, maybe 2 minutes, just do a couple stretches, maybe some heel raises going up onto our tippy toes,
Yeah.
maybe just, some active movement of our neck or shoulders or a couple stretches, just changing positions, getting out of whatever it is that we're always doing, sitting
Yeah.
or extending, just moving. But the more we can do that, even for brief periods of time, the better off that we're going to be.
That's good. Okay. And I was going to ask, do you have any practical recommendations for like practices to do in those breaks? But in a lot of ways, you've already hit upon that. But let me just pitch it to you just in case there's anything you want to take further out of that.
Well, I really liked the 30-minute walking. You know, over our practice, we've done consulting in several situations, and one of the things that the consultant that we utilized is they would actually have us get up and go outside and walk for 10, 15 minutes. It was always
Nice.
very refreshing and just kind
Yeah.
of reset your mind, change the stress level,
Yep.
a little bit of scenery, just looking at some trees for a while as opposed to walls, you
Yeah.
know. It's a good thing. So, I mean, I like that. Another thing could be maybe you do 10 chair squats, like you're going to sit down and stand up 10 times, or some
Okay.
going up onto your tippy toes 10, 15 times. Just simple things are really good. But for me, just changing the situation and getting outside for 10, 15 minutes is really refreshing.
That's good. What about, are there any practices that people can utilize, habits they can employ to help protect their bodies? Their job is to work, 5 to 6 days per week, and they're employing the 30 minutes, break and walking. But are there any other protective habits that they could employ?
Sure, stretching is an important thing. I mean, we've mentioned in the past, athletes go stretch before they perform.
Yes.
Well, as an employee, we should get ready for what it is we're going to do all day.
Yeah.
It may not be the same level or degree intensity, but we're still doing something. That's why
Yeah.
there's so many that's part of why there's so many cumulative trauma disorders, because of gradual stuff over time that takes a toll on the body. If we were more proactive by doing some stretching, by doing
Yeah.
some strengthening, by becoming a little bit aware of posture, doing some postural exercises, changing positions, a lot of that would certainly be handled and or much less severe. So,
Yeah.
strengthening, stretching, those are keys. Posture is key, and just maintaining general mobility by able to get up from the floor, squatting, standing.
Yeah.
I think all those things they all contribute.
Yeah. If you were to distill that down to just one, what's the biggest bang for the buck habit?
Biggest bang, gosh, I would probably go with just the walking, just getting off of
Yeah.
our butt and
Yeah.
getting moving some.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't like going to the gyms. That's cool. There's so many things you can do at home, but it's just getting up and doing something. If 10 minutes, start with 10 minutes, 15 minutes, low barrier, a low hurdle to jump over that anybody can do. And then over a few weeks of doing that, a couple times, 3 times a week, that's not so bad. And then that 10, 15 minutes, it's very feasible. Now I can go 15 to 20. So it's a gradual start, and just get moving, doing something, whatever it is you like. Maybe you like swimming,
Yeah.
go swimming. Maybe you love
That's
lifting
good.
weights and socializing. A lot of people go to the gym because they can socialize.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's good.
That's good. Well, let's look at maybe something like a case study. I'm sure there's going to be a few examples that come to mind as you think this one through. But let's say you've got somebody probably in their late 50s, early 60s. They've worked at a desk job for 40 years. So they've got 40 years of past, whatever postural, stuff that they've brought to the table. What would you want them to start doing tomorrow?
Probably, I would say start with stretching. Do several stretches, and that might be some stretches for your upper traps, some stretches for your shoulder, middle traps, some stretches for your low back, some for your glutes, some for your hamstrings, some for your calves. That's probably 5 or 6. So if you did 1 minute on both sides, obviously, that's 10, 12 minutes a day.
Yeah.
That would be a great for flexibility, for mobility, and stretching feels good. It really
It
feels
does.
good when
Yeah.
done correctly. I mean, you can hurt yourself stretching if you're doing ballistic stretching or doing too aggressive. But if you're just doing a gentle, sustained stretch, it feels good as long as you're not stretching into pain, So I would start with the stretching and changing positions. But this also needs to be done regularly. One time and done for the next 2-3 weeks isn't going to be a lot of help.
Yeah.
It is a start, but it's not going to be a lot of help.
Yeah.
So you got to have that consistency of daily for stretching, If we're talking about some more activity that I would want, then maybe we need a little bit of strengthening for maybe some glute muscles, so for some back muscles.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would probably do some other exercises, maybe 3 times a week. But it's a little bit at a time. It's
Yeah.
gradual, and then it's incremental.
That's great. All right. Well, if you had a magic wand, what would you want? One thing for how people approach desk work.
One thing I would say probably, find one small thing that you like and start with that. So
That's good.
maybe it is, I want to do stand up and sit down 10 times.
Mm-hmm.
It's a low bar to jump over. So we'll start with that. But I would just say, just find a small change, one small thing, because it adds up over time. It's like investing, right? We all know when you invest, it's best to do it for the long haul.
Yeah.
You might not be able to put a whole lot in, but if you do it monthly over time, 25, 30 years, whatever it is, it's going to add up and it's going to have an impact. Well, movement is the same way. Stretching is the same way. Strengthening is the same way. All those small little changes that you make over time, they add up, but it's consistency over time, and you got to have it for the long haul.
Yeah. That's good. I love the marriage that you're bringing there about like choose something that you want to do, choose something that you need to do, that marriage there, but really the helpful encouragement to do something simple that will end up being sustainable. That's great. And love that investment analogy as well. Well, thanks for listening in. Those of you that have heard this episode, you may be working at a job that requires you to sit, but your body was designed to move. And so look to employ some of these simple tips and tricks that Josh has helped us out with today. You can learn more at vancept.com. You can submit future questions at podcast.vancept.com. Well, until next time, everybody, keep on moving toward that optimal health. Thanks, everybody.